Andy Smith here. We are doing something that I haven't done in a long time, which is two incredible creators have agreed to talk about Malazan with me on the internet, and I could not be more happy. Last week, I finished the third novel of the Malazan Empire, E&C Esslemont's Stonewielder. Right here, I got the hardcover. It looks like you got the soft cover. Yep. Michael just has the cloud. We are here to talk about Stonewielder, and I think kind of consensus, a lot of people, this is where they start really enjoying the Esslemont books. We'll talk about that in a little bit. My review I posted last Friday, so you can check that out on my page. But let's introduce these other folks that I imagine most of you know. So guys, for the first question, if you could introduce yourself, your channel, and then maybe tell us about the first time you read Stonewielder, how much you had read in the Malazan universe there, and sort of your mindset going into it. Philip, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, thank you, Andy, for inviting me. It's really great to be chatting with you again after a while. And yeah, it's a community, and we love having our people around here, and always lovely to chat with Michael as well. Stonewielder. And I'm Philip Chase, and my channel's just Philip Chase, and huge Malazan fan. I consider the Malazan series as a whole, the series, plural series, as to be my favorite of all time. The greatest literary journey I've ever been on, and definitely I feel that the novels of the Malazan Empire are a big part of that, and added to my appreciation of the other series, even as I enjoyed the novels of the Malazan Empire in and of themselves. And I think that Stonewielder is probably my favorite of the novels of the Malazan Empire, actually, of the six. As you said, though, I actually really love Knight of Knives too, but Stonewielder was like, wow, okay, this is really cool. There's an iconic character in there that's handled, I think, really well. There's an iconic location in the Malazan world that you hear about a little bit in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but to actually see it portrayed, and I think portrayed really brilliantly, to have it live up to the legend, as it were, it was really satisfying for me as well. And yeah, I love this book. I'm very positive on it. I do have to preface, or I have to mention, it's been years since I read this book, so I'm going to be really fuzzy on the details. I'm going to be very fuzzy on the details. I might misremember some things. I have certain images, certain plot lines that are just kind of somewhere in here. The neurons are firing a little bit, and I'm remembering things. But Andy was kind enough to talk me through some of the major plot points before we started recording. But I will do my best to contribute to the discussion. But I do remember loving this book, and I did chat about it with AP Canavan, a Critical Dragon. We were doing our read-through of the Malazan series, and this was part of it. So previous to that, I had read the Malazan Book of the Fallen only, and then I decided I needed to reread it, and I was going to read everything else in the Malazan universe. And so this was part of my read-through of the Malazan Book of the Fallen and novels of the Malazan Empire with AP Canavan. And we did a spoiler-free discussion every time we read a book on my channel, and then we did the spoiler-filled discussions on his channel. And sometimes we were even lucky enough to talk to either Stephen Erickson or Ian Esslemont about the books. But it's just a tremendous series for me. This is a real jewel in the Malazan universe, in my opinion. And I can't wait to talk about it with the two of you.
Awesome. Thanks, Philip. And maybe I should say at the start, since you mentioned spoilers, I think we're going to be spoiling Stonewielder for sure. First two books of the other novels, because we might talk some backstory, maybe of like Kyle and Greymane. And I would say maybe up to book, like 6 in the Book of the Fallen is where this roughly takes place in. I think we're fine. Okay. Fine doing that. So I think that'll be the plan. Sorry, Michael, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
No, good question. I was going to say, I think Stonewielder, it's around the time of book 7 in Book of the Fallen. I can't remember if it's before or after, but that's the thing about Malazan. There's so many details to nitpick about.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically of one spoiler of a main character in Stonewielder is definitely around Yigatan and the Bone Hunters, and I don't know anything else that might be in book 7, but anyway, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Oh, cat. Hello.
This is Minnesota, my cat.
Aw.
Love it. So my state is Queensland, which doesn't quite become a good cat name, but
Queen is pretty good.
I know, right? Yeah. And I got two cats who are at the door. They're very concerned because I'm awake earlier than normal this morning.
What's going on?
All right. But yeah, no, I'm Michael Cronk, or the book guy. And I feel like I reluctantly became a Malazan fan because I don't know, like I think in many ways when I was reading the series, I had almost like a love-hate relationship with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I was like, everything I'm reading is good. It's just so dense and so complicated and takes so much work. But over time, man, it grows on you. And now there's nothing like it. You know, there's nothing quite like it. But no, I think the Ian Esslemont books, they don't get anywhere near as much attention as I think they deserve. You know, I think there's the inevitable comparison to Stephen Erickson. And I think we were saying before we started recording that, you know, no one wants to be compared to Stephen Erickson. You know, he's one of the best, you know. But I do think that Esslemont, when he writes, he has a really good balance of sort of mimicking style, but then also becoming more original. And I think Stonewielder is where he lands that balance for the first time, where it feels like Malazan, but it also feels like an original work within the Malazan world. And yeah, definitely this was a moment of like, he really, really nailed this book. Yeah, definitely. Not that I thought the first two were bad, you know, or anything like that. Like there's no bad Malazan book, you know, but Stonewielder, that was the bullseye. Yeah. Was that all the questions?
I think you did all the questions.
Okay.
You put a finger on something I wanted to ask, so we'll go to that question first, because I talked briefly in my review about trying to put a finger on how Esslemont and Erickson do this, where they do feel both connected and yet distinct. Some of like the storytelling beats that I think is obviously the multi-perspective storytelling, and making sure that those perspectives are not just multiple people, but multiple sides of any sort of conflict. In this book, you're getting the Malazans who have been on the Corellery continent for a little while and have failed, and now are just kind of like ruling here outside of the Empire. And then you have the actual invaders. Then you have the Crimson Guard. You have people at the Storm Wall, both who are enslaved and fighting there, and also the real believers in the Lady. And so you get everything. But yet something about Esslemont is distinct from Erickson. I think he's much more direct a lot of times. Things happen very quick in his books compared to Erickson. And I think, I don't know if this is, I've only read 3 Esslemonts, but I would also say Esslemont never really, I don't know a good way to say this other than like takes it to sort of another gear. Every sort of Book of the Fallen book, I feel like there's a point where all of a sudden just like things just ramp up and whatever's happening just slams together, and it, you know, there's that confluence of characters and plot events and whatever, or just themes. And so far, Esslemont hasn't really done that. He tells the story a little bit more straightforwardly, with like obviously a climax, but not quite in the same way. I'm curious, Michael, since you brought it up, like, does that jive with you? Is there another way that you might describe that synthesis of creativity they have?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because I think in many ways Esslemont does more grit, you know, and I think Erickson it's going to get tricky. Ian
Esselson.
No, I think Stephen, when he does storytelling, he absolutely does grit, you know, because Malazan encompasses everything eventually. But he also has this sort of grandiosity, like he's an epic storyteller, you know. And in many ways, I'd say that Stephen Erickson is more like a Robert Jordan, and I would say Esslemont is more like a George Martin, in that one is a bit more, you know, like magical fantasy, and the other is a bit more historical and gritty, you know. I mean, that's a very vague sort of definition, but I think they've definitely got that. That's one of the things that make them different.
Philip, how you've talked to both those authors probably more than either of us, so I'm curious what your thoughts on how do they create this seamless world that is also distinct.
Yeah, well, let me agree with Michael to begin with, which is to say, I've always felt that Esslemont leans more on the horror elements than Erickson does. That's something that he does really well. He does atmosphere really beautifully. I love the atmosphere that he establishes in here, and gritty and kind of gory even at times. But Also, I would agree with Michael to the degree that Erikson is probably much more of the epic scope, let's say, in particularly in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We're not talking about the Bocalan and Corbel Brooch or something here. We're talking which is again an entirely different beast in a way, even
very different.
Yeah.
And even each story is very different of the Bocalan and Corbel Brooch.
That is actually very true
in genre. That's actually since you mentioned the horror, that's the most horror that Erikson ever gets is in those stories.
Yep, in a really absurdist kind of way, I guess.
I'm thinking of a couple of them very particularly, but anyway, sorry, keep going.
But things they have in common a lot. Obviously, they created this world together. They did a lot of it while gaming, and there's a certain rapport that I can only imagine with admiration and a bit of envy, perhaps, that the two of them must have had in creating this world together. I think that one thing they share is a kind of Malazan humor that is something that the two seem to have a good time with when they're together and making this world up as I imagine it. But also it shows in the characters. It shows in and Malazan is also famous for its duos, and I think that's we've all heard that little tidbit, that little fact before, and that being a reflection of the two of them gaming together. That makes a lot of sense, where they were role playing these characters. And the characters have that certain rapport as well. So I love that. So that's the thing that I think binds these stories together, obviously. And of course, the different locations. And as I was saying in the beginning, I really do feel that these different series all feed into each other, and that the whole is greater than the parts because of how they supplement each other, how they complement each other and bring each other alive. Are we doing spoilers now, or are we?
Yeah, from the beginning, I think we're gonna do spoilers.
Just want to be super sure. So when we see the storm wall in here, and we see members of the Iron Bars and the other members of the Crimson Guard there, and experiencing it through those characters, it's really something, right? And we had allusions to this place as just this place that people whisper of in tones of awe in Malazan Book of the Fallen, like, that dude over there, he survived the storm wall, and it's like, whoa, and then you get to see it in this book. And I think because Esslemont is so good at atmosphere, he does a stellar job with it. He sold me on the storm wall, absolutely. So I think they complement each other beautifully. There are certain things that Esslemont does better than Erikson, I think, and the atmosphere part, I think, is, and if you like that horror element, you get a bit more of it, a little more leaning on that in there. As Michael said, though, and as we were saying before we started recording, I mean, who wants to be compared to Steven Erikson? Yeah. I mean, the guy is a genius. Esslemont has said that himself, that Erikson is a genius. So, but I also think that these are brilliant books, the novels of the Malazan Empire and the prequel series as well. Path to Ascendancy, and they don't get enough attention. Frankly, I think they deserve a lot more love. I'm a fan of so much that he does in here, which I'm sure we're going to get into the details. But yeah.
When you talk about atmosphere, I mean, I just finished this last week, and I'm this is like the hottest June I think that we've had in the Midwest here in the United States on record. But like every time that I read about the storm wall, as I'm reading it, you just felt so cold because he does not let you forget how miserable everything is. You are wet, like the fingers are getting hard and getting numb, and there's frost on beards, and you can see like every single way that he can create that atmosphere, he really does. And it is the actual one of my favorite, maybe to get more specifically, one of my probably favorite scenes in the book is when Blues eventually is actually Shell is taken to the wall, and she's one of our main viewpoints in this. And the first time that she is brought out, sort of prepped in, like, there's like a waiting room where she gets to like choose whatever she chooses. I think she chooses a sword. She's chained to somebody else, then she's up and chained on the wall, and she just experiences all of this for the first time. How cold it is, that she can't access her warren, what the storm riders are doing, the sea, how it just all these lights flashing. It's completely epic in scale, and like it's the reason why these Malazan books are so taking with that atmosphere. I just love that scene.
Yeah. And there's something otherworldly and alien about those storm riders that also lends to that atmosphere too. That it's hinted at in the first book in the series too, Knight of Knives. But I think you get this sense of it more in here too, and that's a big Malazan thing. And when you're looking at others and outsiders and that kind of thing, that's a kind of okay, I wonder what's going on here. And the idea of, because you also have in here a religious you have religious zealots going around and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of othering going on there. That's a big Malazan thing, is that idea of othering and overcoming that and seeing oneself in the other is a huge Malazan thing as well. That's a thing that, again, you're asking about things that tie these series together. I think that's a huge thing, because Esslemont handles that in his own way as well. The idea of connecting with the other, seeing oneself in the other, which is, of course, often can lead to acts of compassion. But yeah, that's another big thing I think that connects these series.
Well, let's start. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh no, I was going to say the Storm Riders were a real highlight of this one, because I can't remember how long, but we've been seeing glimpses of them and hints of them for a while, and to finally sort of see them at full force was I don't know, I still feel as though there's so many mysteries about them. Like, I was reading through a discussion board trying to figure out who and what they were, and there was theories about whether they were like a lost race of Jagged warriors, or whether they were Tista Andi who had gone under the sea and become Atlanteans or something, but no one really knows. And I think that's a great it's an unusual thing in Malazan, where normally we do see long backstories or deep, rich histories and cultures of every single people group. But these guys are just an enigma, because they're so, is it xenophobic is the word? They just hate all outsiders, so they're not going to tell anyone what they're up to. And it makes them so compelling.
And there's this weird intimacy, though, when they attack the wall, the storm wall. There's this weird intimacy almost between them and the people guarding the wall as they're trying to kill each other.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like this weird medieval sort of honor culture going on, because I think a couple times they salute each other from the waves or things like that.
Yeah.
So we have a broad swath of when we read this book. As I said, I just finished it. Michael, you did it a couple years ago. Philip Chase, maybe a little further than that. So
kind of
my first
very thick on me.
broad question, because I think this is very interesting, because we read a lot of books, all of us. And so I always find it interesting to think back on books and what is the thing that I remember, both broader, in theme, but also what are the things that really stayed with me, whether a character or a scene. And I'm curious to get those thoughts. So maybe I'll ask Michael first, and we'll go to Philip and kind of see short, medium, and long, what's going to stay with each of us as fantasy readers. So Michael, when you think Stonewielder, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
A couple of things. A really niche thing comes to mind first is Calor, who is one of the great antagonists of the wider Malazan series. He shows up in this book, and I swear, every time I'm lying awake in bed at night thinking of all the injustices in the world, Calor is first on my mind. Why hasn't that guy got his comeuppance yet? Oh, but that's what's so great about him. He's just unstoppable. Oh, anyway, but
yeah, and he's both unstoppable and pitiful at times, especially in some of the latter ones. You start feeling bad for me, wait, no,
it's this guy, no,
awful things. But he's never cool. He's not Anomander Rake or even the Storm Riders. He's somewhere in between. Yeah, that's great. That's a great shout.
Yeah, he's almost like the golem of this world in many ways, isn't he?
Yeah. Maybe he'll destroy the ring in the end. Maybe that's what we're all
right. Yes.
Spoilers for Lord of the Rings. People know Lord of the Rings.
But I also love the showdown, because I'm actually struggling to remember this part. But wasn't there a massive flood? Because I know that happens in one of the later books as well. But I remember in Stonewielder, that's a huge part of it. I remember just a couple of times reading passages from there and just being man, this language and this prose is just incredible. And it was in many ways, it was very Erikson, that huge epic scale where you're just am I reading a book or am I like, doing quantum physics? It just felt so incredible. And that was a moment I was just like, oh, I bow to the master here. His command of language was phenomenal, but that was definitely a huge standout for me. Yeah. There's a few others. I mean, I think Kyle, for one, Kyle, I've seen like people have very split opinions about Kyle. But I also felt as though this was the book where he became less of a generic character.
Yeah.
Because Kyle previously is like, he's the young, naive guy who's going to go, into the wider world and fix everything. And I'm like, it's kind of a plot line we've seen before with Genos Paran in the main series. But by the time of the third book, he becomes a much more interesting character. And of course, the way that his people's native magic and how it's sort of, it's different to all the Warren magic that the, the more imperialistic, bigger empires use.
Yep.
It's a fascinating way to like play off that. So those were some highlights for me for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree with the Kyle character. I think he gets a lot of flack, probably justly so, from sort of the Return of the Crimson Guard disappointment, I think, that people feel. And so they sort of put all that on that character. But in this one, I agree, it's much more interesting. He doesn't have much to do sort of narratively. He's just kind of there to support his friend Greymane, which is noble. But you also get to see him from a lot of other people's perspectives, which I love. Like the Marine, Sooth is kind of the main Marine you're in. And he like looks at Kyle, who's like the adjunct, which of course is a callback to Gardens of the Moon, at least in my mind, whenever I think of the adjunct Lorne. And you get to, whenever you get to see someone a perspective that because you've been in those person's head from another perspective, I just love that trick in fantasy novels. And so I agree. Kyle gets some good bonuses here. Philip, even further away, when you think of Stonewielder now, what do you think of? You might have already answered this, I think, with talking about the Stormguard, but
definitely the Stormwall. But I would also say Greymane is something that I still remember. I like the relationship between him and Kyle you were just talking about, and that for a younger person to be having a kind of a revered, legendary older figure there to kind of look up to be intimidated by, to want to live up to. I like that kind of relationship in a story, but also just having this grizzled old veteran who's got one last great deed to do. And I vividly remember the ending to this where he's underwater and his demise, if you will. Is it entirely clear that he's gone at the end of this? I guess kind of sort of is, but is it really? I mean, he's deep down in that hole in the water, right?
Yep.
As far as I remember.
Yep. There's a scene where fishermen look down and they see a shape, and I think it says something like he has a big mane or something. Like he does a good trick of like that's who that's down there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I assume that's the end for Greymane, but there's this little teeny part of me that's like, does he somehow survive this? This larger than life figure who,
because he has the sword. And
exactly. I mean, that's the
never
title
know with magical swords.
It's Stonewielder, right? That's the title, right? And you see that he has. It's a bit like the movie about Wolverine, Logan, right? It's a bit like that, right? He's got this past that is sort of weighing on him, stuff that he's done as a military man, and he's been responsible for a lot of deaths, and he's done a lot of things that maybe he's not so proud of, but things that maybe he felt at the time he had to do, and all these big things weighing on him, even as he makes this final kind of sacrifice. Which not everyone is going to understand, right? Even the people that he's supposedly allied with are not necessarily going to understand his decision-making there at the end. I love that. I just love the way Esslemont handled Greymane in here as a central figure in this story, and how it all came out. That's just that's a trope that I really love, and I think Esslemont did a great job with it.
Yeah, 100% agree. The old grizzled veteran's got something to prove and a past, and we've been waiting for that. Like all of Return of the Crimson Guard, it was kind of waiting, and it never happened. And then, it happens in this book. It's so good. Go ahead.
Okay. Do I wear my thoughts on my face? Is it that obvious?
Well, there's a big breath. It felt like you wanted to get something out.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about how much Malazan always seems to have the grizzled old veteran They have that trope a lot. And it's funny because I literally just said, Kyle is too much like Genos Perrin, but we could say the same thing, that Greymane is a lot like Whiskey Jack. But Greymane rings so true, doesn't he? And I think that's just something that both of these authors do. The cynical old man who's been beaten up by the world. And I don't know, it makes me curious about their life experiences, that they could both write that sort of trope with such authenticity there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Having that history is really something that they, together, having these, these veterans who've been through the ringer and, been to hell and back. And I also find it fascinating that the older the character gets, the more they can question some of the stuff that they did in their youth. I really feel like there's a lot weighing on Greymane here in this, and that he's just kind of that's a big motivation for what he does in here. And I think, if I remember correctly, too, it wasn't easy to get him going in the beginning, right? He was kind of trying to hide from the world, in a sense, right? Because of that past.
Yeah, he's trying to start a fencing school, which is kind of funny. But now a recurring bit in the Malazan world, that if you're feeling down in your luck, you start a fencing school in some city somewhere.
Not sure how good he was at that, but yeah. I mean, obviously
not great.
Yeah. It wasn't. He lacked the patience to be a great teacher. Probably the patience was absolutely a piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
I think it's touching on that. A big part of this book is sort of redemption for some older guys. The other character is High Fist Rillish, which I don't know if you remember that, but it's a very interesting character because he's not really, he is a military commander, but he's not the highest of the high, and he's not looking for advancement. This is kind of his last rodeo, and it opens and closes with Relish, the book. It opens with him with his family and getting called back to service for the Empire, and it ends with him somehow getting back to his family, in this beautiful beginning and closing. And I wanted to ask, one of the most notorious villains in the Malazan world is Malak Rel, right? Who in this novel, again, we're talking spoilers. If you've hung around now, you've heard enough spoilers, but this is just such a big one. I want to say spoilers are coming. Becomes the Emperor. And he's actually the one who recruits Greymane and Rillish to kind of give them this chance at redemption. And talking about Calor as well as villains who maybe get some street cred, I was like, oh, he's trying to maybe correct some of the wrongs of Lysine. I didn't forgive Malak Rel, but there's an interesting part of him sort of taking some of the redemption of Greymane. Did either of you feel that at all about Rel? And I haven't read other books, so there might be more coming with Emperor Rel, but that's kind of where
I definitely lie awake in bed at night thinking of Rel.
But here's the thing. Go ahead, Mike. You go first.
Oh, sure. Well, I think that Rel is fascinating because in any other story, someone like Rel would just be like an Emperor Palpatine, almost one-dimensional, pure evil. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Rel is, he's much more nuanced because, if you get an evil emperor in the real world, they might occasionally do something smart. From time to time. They're not pure evil. They're not purely incompetent, because they have to at least look the part so people will support them, But, and Rel, absolutely, he has a couple of smart things he does. And I think, I won't go, too much later into the series, but I know he shows up in the prequels, Path to Ascendancy. And a lot of his strategies there are very smart. He came to power for good reason. He's a cunning and ruthless person. Yeah. So he didn't just luck his way into it. But yeah, definitely an evil dude overall. But every once in a while, he will almost accidentally, support the side of good, or whenever it suits his purpose, I think to use a very basic method, if you're familiar with the Dungeons and Dragons and the alignment chart, you have your lawful, neutral, chaotic, good, neutral, evil. Malazan is not a chaotic evil who's just pure over the top mustache twirling. He's a neutral evil, and neutral are all about what's going to work best for me. It's like selfishness is their prime goal here, and a lot of purely selfish villains, they know how to lie and charm and act the part, and they know how to help other people when it's going to benefit them. And that's what makes them so insidious, because it's completely believable. It's so easy to get swept up in what they're laying down. I think that's 100% what Malazan is all about, and you can't help but admire when he's effective in what he's doing.
Yeah, I would agree. Speaking of effectiveness, when you think about the three people who have been at the top of the Malazan Empire that we know from these books, right? So you had Kellanved, and then you had Lysine, and then, of course, Malazan. None of them are really nice people, right? Kellanved we like to laugh at and all that, but he does some seriously horrible things, to consolidate that empire. Lysine, nobody really likes Lysine. And nobody really likes Malazan, but they're all clever and ruthless in their own ways, aren't they? And that makes me wonder about this exploration maybe of leadership that's going on here in all these series. That does it take a somewhat evil, maybe neutral evil, but an evil person in a sense, a ruthless person maybe, let's put it that way, to lead something like an empire, right? That is not just it's an acquisitive empire, an actively acquisitive empire that is conquering other people who don't want them there, right? Going to other places and killing people and conquering them and exploiting them. So, as much as you'd like to think that we could live in a world where good people lead societies, to have an organization as big as an empire, maybe it inherently requires somebody who's ruthless and Machiavellian and just downright selfish and awful sometimes. Or is it the case that you have to be that in order to get there, or do you become that by getting there? If you see what I mean, chicken egg kind of thing, maybe. But but in all these cases, you can't just dismiss Malazan because he's obviously clever, obviously cunning, capable, manipulative. You can use positive or negative connotations as you describe it, but one thing you can't say is that he's incompetent or stupid or an idiot, right? And maybe he is. If you're going to have an empire, maybe you're required to have somebody like him at the top of it. There's just no other way to have it.
It's interesting you mentioned that theme of like the necessary aspect of, maybe we'll call it cunning or moral ambiguity at the head of something big, because another big like media discussion now is, I don't know if you guys have watched the TV show Andor, the Star Wars TV show. I won't talk too much about that. I'm watching season 2, but a big part of that is even like the rebellion in Star Wars, which like is clearly like good guys versus the evil bad empire. Like that delves into like, if you actually were going to have a rebellion against an evil empire, you would have to have also some of that Malazan-esque cunning and do some bad things. And it would ask some really, really tough questions of the people involved in that. And that's just something that Malazan obviously does so well, so often. Let me ask
takeaway here is I've got to watch some Andor. That's what I need to do.
It is. I will say so. I won't talk too much about Andor, but I was in a huge Star Wars slump for years after the Rise of Skywalker, which I did not enjoy and thought was quite poor. And like this like month has kind of brought that back to me because I was watching Andor. Like I've watched the original trilogy now. I rewatched. So if you're looking for a shot in the arm of Star Wars, I would recommend Andor for sure.
Cool. Will do. Is that some of the same characters that were in Rogue One? Is that a pre-Rogue One timeline?
It is, yes. And actually, interestingly, I didn't really love Rogue One. I thought it was good, but I didn't love it. And so that's why I didn't get into Andor. And I just had a couple friends who were like, you got to watch this. This is definitely your shit. And they were right. My friends know me. So if you're looking at that, I would highly recommend it.
Nice.
So in my review, I sort of said the overarching, and Philip, and I think Michael, both of you have touched on this already. Like the overall theme for me is that fear of something can really pave the way for a system that is actually worse than sort of the cure of this fear. Because I think from the beginning, it's clear that like the reason that the lady has such a strong hold on this subcontinent is because there is such great fear for the Storm Riders. And as we've already said, we don't really know a lot about the Storm Riders, if this fear is warranted, how much fear there actually should be. We know the lady fears them quite a bit, but that's about it. We know maybe they want to migrate to the Hole for some reason. Like there's a lot of vagueness. And I actually like that we don't know too much about that, because it has us asking these questions. We don't know if where they're at sort of with their respect for human life. But we do know that because of the fear of those people, this system all over centered on the lady has grown up. The Storm Guard does a lot of morally reprehensible things, obviously, like chaining people to walls and forcing them to fight when they don't want to. We have the viewpoint of, I'm forgetting the name of Bakuna, who is like this high assessor, this judge, and he's finding out about these crimes against children in this city. And we don't really get to the bottom of that, except we know that it was perpetrated by the cult of the lady, or the church that was in here. We know from Davaleth's character that like even this other empire is doing some pretty bad stuff because they are just totally devoted to the lady, and like there's no religious pluralism in this area because they're so fearful of this. I'm maybe just like an open-ended question as I kind of talk about that theme. Is that something that you took away from the books, or one part of that experience that really stands out for you in exploring that? Kind of open question. Whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, well, heck yeah. I mean, the storm wall it's a wall. It's a symbol as well as a literal place.
Yeah.
And why do we have walls? What are they for? Usually, we want to draw a distinction between us and them. We want to separate us and them. It's about separation. It's about othering often enough, isn't it? So there is and also a price to keeping such an artificial barrier, in place, and you see it through the suffering of the characters, the Iron Bars and the others, the members of the Crimson Guard, whom we're sympathetic toward, and therefore we see the evil of this place that is meant to be, that is probably perceived by the populace of this continent as a good thing because it keeps them safe, right? And they're indoctrinated religiously to believe in all of this as well. It's part of, I don't remember all the details, but I think that's part of it, right? Is the part of the religious worship. So yeah, I think it's a really, really potent symbol, and obviously very relevant to us, today. Building walls and barriers to keep them out, the other, right? And that's a fear-based reaction, right? That's a hate-based reaction. But it's also we want to feel secure and safe. So we have to put up this wall to keep those other beings away from us, because we don't want them around here. They may be violent, or they may be impure in some way, right? They belong to the wrong faith or religion or what have you. So I find it to be a very, very potent symbol in here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the Blessed Lady, I don't think she fears anyone, because I don't know if you. I confess I didn't catch this when I read the book, but when I was reading summaries last night, I caught it for the first time. But apparently, we see who the Blessed Lady truly is at the end of the book. Where she is an aspect of the crippled god, who we kind of know is like the arch villain in many ways of the greater series. He's trying to destabilize as much as possible so that he can create chaos and he can break free. That's sort of his whole goal. So we know the Blessed Lady isn't afraid of anything, but she's creating all this fear entirely to secure her power base. But it's very much like, well, I don't want to be too politically relevant, but it's a lot like creating a crisis just to present yourself as the solution to the crisis, which is a common tactic used by dictators and politicians and people trying to trick people into being
and
afraid.
religions,
and then,
certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It also reminds me of if you've ever read Discworld. Actually, that's right, Eddie. You're reading some Discworld, aren't
I've
you?
just started.
Yeah. Well, if you read Guards, which is the first of the City Watch book, there's a great plot in that one where there's you might call them a cult, but they are literally summoning a dragon into the city of Ankh-Morpork. And once everyone's terrified, oh, there are dragons everywhere, they're coming for our children, the group stands up and says, vote us in and we'll fix the dragon problem. Which it's like comically overt, but it's an extremely realistic thing. That's how it happened. The creating of a crisis. And that's entirely what the Blessed Lady does. And you see how when that's paired up with, religious zealotry, not to be clear, not like religion in general, but like the extreme end of zealotry, where you don't question things, you don't, think critically about things, you just accept what your boss, your spiritual authority figure is telling you. Then you see how easily it is for you to be completely misled and to buy into any sort of story that someone else wants for their own agenda. So yeah, it's definitely an important story, always relevant, and something I think cannot be talked about enough, to try to get the point across.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad that you mentioned who the lady actually is, because that is, at the end we see, the actual piece of the lady. Everything's the whole time. It's actually the piece of the crippled god that is being taken back to him, which of course makes the crippled god more powerful for sort of the end of the Book of the Fallen arc. This is we're coming up here towards the end, so I'm gonna maybe ask a larger question here. And as I looked at my question, I realized this is a slight spoiler for the 10th book. So I said before we were going to spoil up to 7. For this last question, if you haven't read the entire Book of the Fallen, step aside, or I don't think you can be spoiled where like you're going to ruin your reading experience, but there's a question I wanted to ask in relation to Stonewielder, because the revelation makes total sense that this is the crippled god, especially since we knew there's a piece of a god that was on the earth. And but we know the ending of that story is compassion by the Malazans and trying to be able to return that entity to where they came. Yeah. And this coincided with the question I had on my review of The Crippled God, the book. One person came up and said, like, I understand what was happening, but I'm really frustrated by the tension in the theme between a couple things, because it seems the theme in Toll the Hounds is that redemption has to be earned, and there must be some sort of price for wrongs that are done, and it's a longer process than sort of a hollow redemption. I think that certainly is a theme of Toll the Hounds, and yet we're supposed to accept that this is what this user said. There is this hollow redemption of the crippled god at the end of the 10th book. And because there's so many awful things that happen in the name of the crippled god on this subcontinent, and we now know, I thought it would be interesting to have, I have some Malazan heads with me to banter around that question of that tension sort of in the whole world of Malazan between these ideas of redemption and compassion. And those are sometimes clashing, sometimes not. And I kind of wanted to open up to you all, taking into account specifically this stuff in Stonewielder, but also larger. How do you think, there's a huge question, I know you can't answer it, in 5 minutes or whatever, but maybe some initial thoughts. Michael, we'll start with you. Like, how do you bring about the tension between those two ideas in this world that I think is a central, obvious theme that both of these authors are returning to time and again?
It's a tricky question, because I think for one, in the wider Malazan story, right from the beginning, they do an amazing job at blurring, adding nuance and depth to the concepts of good and evil. I mean, I think immediately in Gardens of the Moon, very first book, I remember reading it and just being like, hang on, are the Malazans the good guys or the bad guys? What's going on here? Yeah. And it literally took me like most of that book to realize it's not about that. It's about like, in this case, they're the invaders, the people of Darujistan kind of have a right to defend themselves, which is, sorry, I shouldn't have used that phrase, but
And they're literally planting bombs in the streets that can kill civilians, right?
Yeah.
These are the people we're rooting for.
Yeah, the Bridgeburners are essentially terrorists in that first book.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you didn't catch that when you read Gardens of the Moon, that's supposed to be attention for sure.
Absolutely. Yes, it's crazy. But yeah, I think it is more than that. And I think in many ways, the crippled god is like the final perfect encapsulation of these themes, that everyone has a reason for doing what they do. No one's deciding, boy, I'm going to wake up and be evil today. A lot of them, everyone thinks they're doing the right thing in so many ways. It's just often when, that conviction that you're doing the right thing isn't paired up with, wisdom, maturity, compassion. That's when that conviction gets led astray very easily. And I think that's one of the big themes of Malazan, that you've got to have compassion in order to keep yourself morally good. Because without that empathy for others, it's so easy to just prioritize your own well-being and consider that to be the ultimate good for everyone else. If people like me get, more power in society, therefore everyone else is going to be better off. And it's like, no, well, unless you have compassion for other people, you'll fall into darkness every time.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. Well said. I also think that both authors give us a really great sense of the layered history here, including the history of the crippled god. And by this point in both series, I think we have some understanding that the crippled god didn't exactly come voluntarily, that there was some coercion. There was actually, he got kind of ganged up on by these elder gods, Cruel and company. And it was a horrible thing, that terrible things were done to this entity before this entity did terrible things to other people. And I think that's something that's very important when we think about, certain groups acting out with violence, and we just condemn them outright and say, oh, those people, they're just terrible. They're just, they act with violence, without taking into account the history of what was done to these people in the past. Why are they doing this? At least asking these questions, getting the context and understanding it. It's not to say that you should hold on to the past or whatever, but you need to understand that we're not in a vacuum, that we didn't just suddenly get here and they decided out of nowhere to be violent and angry, right? That you need to understand what's been done to these people. And I think that that's a big part of compassion, is suffering with someone, understanding what they've been through. And understanding isn't necessarily the same thing, I think we all know, as condoning. But I think in order to get a grasp of the situation, at least, and appreciate really all that's happening, you need to take into account the history. So that's all I can say. I don't want to get too more specific than that, because I'm not actually sure when we learn all these details. But I think by this point in the series, we pretty much know that the crippled god has had things done to him that are not pretty. Right?
Yeah, I just had to look it up. So Stonewielder was published between books 9 and 10.
Then definitely.
Exactly right. It's right at the cusp there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
But I was going to say, this is a philosophy I've been thinking about a bit lately, because we have this idea, I think, in society, and perhaps in Western, more puritanical society, that if someone does something wrong, then they need to be punished. And we can debate that, because often punishment doesn't lead to reform or change or improvement. Often if someone, like if a child does something wrong, what they actually need is instruction and guidance, and it's usually better to, see a mistake and return that with, okay, let's help you do better. I'm going to come alongside you, mentor you, teach you, and we're going to do it better next time, And especially when you're dealing with children, like they will make the same mistake. In fact, they'll look you right in the eye and, yeah, I'm going to do it again, because they're cheeky little kids. But we forget that when people get older, we just throw them in jail and toss away the key. And, I think the opportunity to actually help them and then help them return to society and be better people is just a forgotten concept, And it's something that I like in Malazan. We have these, figures who have done horrible things. And there are times when, they get theirs, and other times where you learn to pity them, pity what's been done to them to make them this way, and wonder, is there an opportunity for compassion? Yeah, which is a bit of it's a strange concept for a book series that's often quite dark and violent and gritty, and even filled with moments of horror. And yet we have such an emphasis on compassion that maybe people can change, and maybe even gods can change. And I think it's something that I'd like to see more of.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I mean, speaking as someone who lives in a country with the highest incarceration rates in the world, and not the lowest crime or violent crime rates, in fact, higher than most countries on par population with us. I think absolutely this, you use puritanical, but also just this in law, the eye for the eye, lex talionis, that like if someone does something, they need to receive this harsh penalty, and that will allow justice to be done, I think is demonstrably false. And also I think philosophically, when we think about this, as you said, like that's not how we normally treat those who we love. And I think that's where this imperfect balance between compassion and redemption is always not warring. That's actually exactly what we don't want to say, but it's a give and take between those two, because compassion is something you can always give out to those around you, to try to understand them, to view with kindness upon what they have experienced. But redemption, especially if it's not an empty redemption, also says that these things are not free, that we don't just let people who have done terrible things continue to do those terrible things. We don't not tell people about an abuse situation because we care about their their reputation, or the reputation of our religious affiliation or our country. There's this tension between redemption being a heavy concept and compassion being a free concept, and how we can move through our lives consistently. And it's never perfect. Like there's not a this is how you live. I think that's one of the hardest parts about living with that understanding. I think that's also some of the draw of what we talked about, going to a sort of viewpoint that is so black and white, and you don't have to struggle in those gray areas. And I think that's something that Malazan universe as a whole really pushes against, and Stonewielder in particular.
Well said, Andy. That's a really important clarifying point, that like compassion, you got to have a bit of wisdom paired up with it. You can't just be compassionate indefinitely, because it can be harmful. That's a very, very important point to remember. That's all I had.
There are moments that are just so beautiful, like Itkovian, with the Clan of Moss, and being this taking their suffering in that moment, and it's just an incredible moment. But if you consider where it leads to some degree by Toll the Hounds, then you realize, wait, maybe we needed something along with that compassion here. You can't just blind compassion by itself is not necessarily the right path. You need some wisdom to guide that compassion, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. As we're winding down, I looked at my notes, and there are a couple things we haven't touched on in Stonewielder. So we're going to do a lightning round. I'm going to see if you guys have thoughts about these storylines or not that we haven't talked about. Okay. Or if you remember them at all in Philip's case. Totally fine if you do not. So Usu is a high mage who was with the first invading Malazan army that is now on this continent, and he can't access his warren. If you remember right, he only can access it by touching a still beating heart of a living
I remember
person.
this. Yeah.
Speaking of the horror elements, this is a definite aspect of it. Any thoughts on that storyline? And there's a great reaction, Philip, from you. So what do you remember from that?
Oh, I remember the scene when he's actually got his hand inside. It's iron bars, isn't it?
Yes, at the end, because it's he gets a strong presence finally.
He gets his hand inside his guts, and he's got his hand on his heart, and it's just like, whoa.
And Iron Bars is conscious through it.
Yeah, and he's conscious through it. I mean, that is just horrible stuff. What a loathsome character, too. That is exactly what I meant by leaning on the horror element, for sure. Yeah. It's bloody and it's visceral and it's effective storytelling. It's really good stuff. And then to see Iron Bars go through that, this is a dude who suffers in this book a lot.
Oh man, yeah,
suffers terribly in this book, just being at the storm wall and then having this done, and on and on it goes. But no, that's a visceral moment that I do remember very well. Yeah.
Another storyline that we haven't talked about at all, and I actually think there's a reason for this. I feel like this could have been so much better, in my opinion, of this book, and that's the Ivanar storyline. So this is a guy who's like, it seems to be a gladiator, and then he joins up with something called the Army of the Reform, which is sort of this natural revolution happening in the north of the continent, I believe, like the northeast. My cat is getting into something. Can you hear that? Give me a second. I will stop her from ripping this to shreds.
Yes, I remember that guy now. Yeah. He gets mixed in with that. So isn't this army also part of the religious zealotry that's going on in the book?
So there's this religious zealotry where they're cleansing the countryside. So like they're really going and killing.
Benneth is the spiritual leader.
Benneth is not of the like killings, but of sort of an army of reform that is trying to rise up against this sort of religious purity that is happening there. This Inquisition. Yeah. It's an interesting idea that I think just isn't executed as well, because part of it is Ivanar like doesn't really believe in anything, and slowly he starts to believe in sort of the beauty of like basically religious pluralism, and that this is important and worth fighting for. And then also at the end is very interesting because he loses control of the movement, and they actually start perpetrating the same sort of like cleanses, but of the people that they perceive as bad at the end. And that's sort of where we leave it. We don't sort of get a satisfying conclusion. And I think that's certainly a very interesting and powerful idea that Esslemont had. I just didn't think it was as executed maybe as well as it could have. But I'm curious, any thoughts, Michael, any thoughts on that storyline, or remember that at all?
Oh, yeah. It just reminded me briefly of Stephen Erickson's prequels, the Carcanis trilogy, because you talk about losing control of a situation very quickly. Like, good Lord, things get out of hand there. But
Ooh, that makes me excited. I've been kind of waiting till I know when the third one comes out to really delve into Carcanis. So I haven't done that yet, but I love that, to know that that's coming.
Yeah, man, things escalate quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so what were we talking about? Yes.
I feel like you're illustrating my point, which is Ivanar is like an interesting idea. Maybe the story wasn't executed as well.
Yeah, no, definitely less memorable. Like I had to listen as you were describing, like, yeah, I think I vaguely remember, but yeah, it didn't latch on, didn't make a strong impression. Yeah.
So the fact that it ends inconclusively might be a statement, a deliberate statement about the nature of these things and how they do tend to, like, revolutions tend to eradicate the corrupt, and then they get in power themselves, and then they perpetrate some of the very same things that they were revolting against in the first place. And then it's this perpetuation of corruption, and it doesn't end. There's no neat ending to that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the final one, and this is careful with spoilers because I'm sure this is going to be a storyline later on, which is Kiska and
I was waiting for
find out Leomin traveling in the Warren of Shadow. And maybe just
Leomin.
To be safe, I'll tell you where this ends because Philip's giving me a look like, what do I say here? I don't know what I can say.
Yeah.
So in this book, basically most of the time they're just walking in shadow. They do have to hide from the hounds for a little while, which again is sort of a fun recurring bit in the Malazan world, getting stuck in shadow because hounds are chasing you and you get caught in a cave. But they end up actually having a brief run-in with the Tistleosin, the army of light, which is very interesting because there's this chaos bubble, I don't know, that's starting to eat shadow, and they're able to stop something to happen. It's I don't really know how they did it, because there's like this mysterious figure and it blows up some other figure. So you might know, I don't know. But we know that Cotillion and Shadowthrone are involved because they're sort of at the end, are like, oh, did that. Now we got to go do something else. So it's very sort of disconnected from anything, but I kind of liked being back with those two. And I'm really interested to see what happens with Tyshreen. So I'm really like connected to that storyline. But any memories of that particularly?
Yes.
Look, I remember it. You can go if you like.
Go ahead.
Okay. I remember being surprised by how disconnected that was to every other plot, because in many ways that was a carryover from Return of the Crimson Guard when High Mage Tyshreen vanishes and Kiska is determined to go after him. Yeah. But
and Knight of Knives, which is where we meet Kiska. I think that's kind of the only thread we have to that original one.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was strange to me that we spend so much time there in this book, and it doesn't overlap at all with any of the other plot lines in this story. And yet it wasn't resolved either, was it? That was a bit surprising. But at the same time, I do like, I don't know, like the plot line doesn't end in failure, but it doesn't end satisfactorily, and I think that's intentional, absolutely intentional, because in so many stories the good guy wins at the end of it, and it's almost expected. And I do think there needs to be that occasional failure where things don't work out to remind you that there are some consequences in this story, and that's what happens. It is a strange plot line. I don't think it's bad, but I don't know, so disconnected and doesn't resolve. It's a tough pill to swallow, that one. Yeah.
It's a little Return of the Crimson Guard-esque. Like that's what kind of the problem I had with Crimson Guards. There's too many threads that weren't quite brought together. And this is only one, and the rest really kind of mostly worked, and I was okay with that. But it was sort of an odd, like, maybe they should have just edited this and put it in the next book or sprinkled it, when we're actually getting closer to this resolution. But I haven't read those, so I don't know. Maybe there's a reason for that.
More to come. Yeah. Also, I think there's a thematic connection, though. Anytime the Tice Leosun appear in a Malazan story, there's some kind of.
I hadn't thought of this.
Yeah, so there's zealotry afoot. If you have the Tice Leosun, there's zealotry, right? They are very much believers in their own righteousness once again. So
also,
I think
if this came out right before Crippled God, I mean, you're getting the table set for excellent.
Some great stuff. I mean, some really great stuff. So yeah, I think it's thematically connected, and that's the way to see it. But also, it's not resolved because there's stuff that's going to happen later on.
Yeah, and I think the hard part is I didn't get that in this book. I know that about the Tisleosin because of Dust of Dreams stuff and Crippled God stuff, but in this book, at least in my read through, I didn't quite get that, and I wish there had been. But that's a great point that, like, obviously a huge part of the Tisleosin is like this religious zealotry, which I think,
and that goes back to what Michael was talking about too with Carcanus. So yeah, you've got lots in store for you there. Yeah.
This is music to my ears. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you think you hate them now, just you.
And I just love that Erickson Esslemont, they're like almost, maybe another group is also like pure evil, but the closest thing they had to pure evil is actually like the Army of Light is just like a very Malazan thing to do. So that is Stonewielder by Ian C. Esslemont, third book of the novels of the Malazan Empire. Let's see. Final thoughts from each of you, and then maybe how soon should I start Orb Scepter Throne, and how excited should I be about that? Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, no, this was definitely a strong moment. I was like, I'm definitely like, I'm not just reading this out of loyalty to Stephen Erickson. I'm now loyal to Ian Esslemont. He's a great writer, and I'll definitely be like, sitting there ready for each new release he puts out. He's a fantastic writer, and definitely. I don't know how soon you should start, because I felt like for me with Malazan, for every series, I never binged them. I almost never did 2 books in a row. I almost always stopped and had a break in between because they're so dense. But if you've got momentum behind you, go for it. Absolutely. But yeah, do what works best for you. I think everyone does Malazan at a different pace. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. You've got to have your legs underneath you for it, But Orb Scepter Throne is another fascinating book. To just slightly jump ahead, but of course without spoilers, is that it goes back to Genebacchus, which is where we spent a lot of time with Stephen Erickson's books. And it's a rare occurrence where these two authors actually swap parts of the world and swap characters. So for the first time, Esslemont writes some of the characters that were originally Ericsson's. And
ooh, that is very enticing.
You can debate how well it worked. I think some people have strong feelings on it, but it is a very unique novel out of the whole series, and in that sense, very enjoyable. So, yeah, I think you'll like it.
Yep. You're going to be in Darujistan, which is awesome.
I do love the City of Blue Light, right? I think that's what it is.
So you'll get not only Esslemont's take on that locale, but his take on some very well-known characters from Darujistan, and it's the Esslemont version, of flicking the crumbs off of the vest and all of that,
Very good Krupp tease.
Yes, indeed. Yep. I don't want to say the name, but yeah, okay, it's Krupp.
I'm the one who doesn't know, so this is I'm just taking my.
No, it's fun. It's good fun, but also you learn a lot about the. I was trying to remember now. I'm embarrassed because I can't remember the name, but who are the ones who wear the masks? There's like the first.
Oh, the Segula. The
Segula. Yes.
Yeah.
There's so much about the Segula in.
Oh, fascinating.
Yes. Which you will learn a lot. That if you want to know about Segula, that's the book. That's
so interesting because I've always kind of been like, I like that I don't really know much about them except that they just have numbers, and the lower the number, the scarier you should be of the Segula. That's all I know right now. So that'll be
because you met three of them in
it's Toll the Hounds, right? They're
even way back in Memories of Ice, right? Yeah.
Is there one in Memories? Probably there is.
They're with there's I think there's three of them together. And then that's the first time.
Is that where they're with Lady Envy? That's not Toll the Hounds?
Yes, they're with Lady Envy.
All of these sort of come together, and I'm forgetting which Kenneback is.
They're with Lady Envy, and you realize how formidable they are, and how just one of them, and then one of them, not even the highest rank, defeats Tool. And you realize, oh, whoa, okay,
Yep.
So yeah, they're formidable. But you learn, this is the book where if you want to learn about the Segula, this is it. Yeah.
All right, I'm excited. I'm Michael. I'm a fan of the Palette Cleanse book, so I'm right now doing a couple standalones, doing the new Guy Gavriel K book, and then I'm going to actually do a Discworld book. I just started
Good choice.
Third Death book, and then I think I'll kind of get back into it. Also, at some point, I got to read the first Witness book again to get ready for the new release in the fall. So lots of Malazan to digest, which is great. Thank you all so much for joining me and digesting Stonewielder. This has been, as always, a delightful conversation. Please go. I hope everyone has already subscribed to Philip Chase and Kronk the Book Guy. But if you haven't, go do it now.
Thanks.
Thank you guys for joining me. And first in, last out.
All right.